43 years. That's how long Hugo Pinell survived in a concrete tomb, 23 of them in total darkness, locked in an 8x10 cell, 22 hours a day. 2 weeks after his release to the general population, he was stabbed 19 times and left to bleed out on an exercise yard. This is the story of America's most notorious psychological experiment, a place where the state of California locked human beings in windowless cells for decades, with no contact, no programs, no hope of release. Where over 500 men spent more than 10 years in isolation. Where 100 men endured more than 20 years of solitary confinement. It took a hunger strike of 30,000 prisoners and a landmark lawsuit to expose what was happening inside. But by then, the damage was already done. You're about to enter a facility that changed the course of American incarceration, a Supermax prison that opened in 1989 with one purpose: to break the most dangerous men in California's system. But what most people don't know is what it did to the guards who ran it. Or how 4 rival gang leaders, sworn enemies, would unite in the most unexpected act of defiance. And at the end of this documentary, you'll discover the hidden truth about why California suddenly dismantled the very system it once called the wave of the future. December 1989. The Berlin Wall has just fallen. The Cold War is ending. But in a remote stretch of California's northern coast, near the Oregon border, the state is building something new. A prison designed around a single, terrifying concept: total isolation. Pelican Bay State Prison opens its doors that month. It covers 275 acres of wilderness. And at its center sits the Security Housing Unit, the SHU. 1,056 solitary confinement cells, organized into 132 8-cell pods. Each cell measures exactly 8 feet by 10 feet, smaller than a parking space. According to court documents, each cell contains a concrete ledge with a thin foam pad for a bed, a steel combination sink and toilet, 2 concrete cubes, 1 desk, 1 chair. Everything is gray. Everything is concrete. Everything is permanent. The doors aren't bars. They're perforated steel sheets, designed so guards can see in, but prisoners can barely see out. Armed guards monitor 6 pods, 48 cells, at once from central control booths. Every door is controlled remotely. Former inmates describe the same routine, documented in testimony and legal records. 22.5 hours a day in that cell. 1.5 hours alone in a concrete exercise pen. 8 feet by 20 feet, no equipment, no sunlight from windows. Just artificial light and bare walls. At its peak in the 1990s, Pelican Bay's SHU held nearly 2,000 prisoners. No phone calls. No contact visits with family, meaning no touching, no hugging, nothing. Communication with other prisoners? Forbidden. Educational programs? In 2011, according to Amnesty International, only 37 prisoners out of over 1,000 in the SHU were enrolled in any educational program. Multiple court records and investigative reports reveal the selection process. California identified suspected gang members and sent them to Pelican Bay indefinitely. The evidence needed? Court documents show it could be as simple as tattoos, reading materials, or associations with others, sometimes based on confidential informants. Once validated as a gang member, there were only 3 ways out of the SHU. That's it. No review process. No timeline. Just years bleeding into decades. By 2011, over 500 men had been in Pelican Bay's SHU for more than a decade. According to the Center for Constitutional Rights, nearly 100 had spent over 20 years in total isolation. The annual cost to keep one prisoner in the SHU? Court records show approximately $70,000 per inmate, 126% of the median U.S. household income at the time. But statistics from the Bureau of Justice tell a darker story. More than 70% of all suicides in California's prison system occurred in SHUs, even though SHU prisoners made up only 10% of the total prison population. And then there's what happened to the men themselves. Dr. Craig Haney, a psychologist from UC Santa Cruz, spent decades studying Pelican Bay. In his research interviews with 100 randomly selected SHU prisoners, His findings were published in expert testimony for the Madrid versus Gomez lawsuit. Listen to what he found. Virtually all suffered from nervousness and anxiety. 91% reported chronic lethargy. 70% felt themselves on the verge of an emotional breakdown. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a psychiatrist who also studied Pelican Bay prisoners, identified what he called a specific psychiatric syndrome caused by isolation. According to his testimony in multiple court cases, it included hypersensitivity to external stimuli. The sound of plumbing became unbearable. Hallucinations, panic attacks, cognitive deficits, obsessive thinking, paranoia, loss of impulse control. Former inmates consistently describe the same experience in letters and testimony. Your social skills atrophy. Other people become aversive stimuli. You forget how to be around humans. One inmate who spent over 2 decades in the SHU described it in a letter posted by prisoner advocacy groups. You're buried alive. No contact visits since December 1970. No meaningful touch of another human being for 23 years. If you want to understand how far this system went, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to see gets darker. Inside Pelican Bay, survival wasn't about strength. It was about understanding 3 unwritten rules that controlled every aspect of life. According to court testimony and inmate accounts, direct communication between prisoners was strictly forbidden. But the men found ways. Former inmates described shouting through the perforated steel doors, voices echoing through the pod, guards ordering them to shut up. Some developed a crude sign language, holding papers to the tiny slots in their doors. Others tapped on pipes. Every word was a risk. Documented incidents show guards would punish communication with loss of the one privilege that mattered, that hour and a half outside the cell. With no programs, no television, no radio in most cells, multiple former prisoners described the same coping mechanism in interviews and letters, creating routines. One inmate's account, posted on prisoner solidarity websites, details his schedule: wake at 5 a.m. Exercise in cell, push-ups, sit-ups, pacing. Read whatever books were allowed. Write letters. Sit. Repeat. For 20 years. Others documented in court records and investigative journalism describe breaking down completely. Smearing feces. Cutting themselves. Screaming until their voices gave out. The gang validation process, documented extensively in the Ashker versus Brown lawsuit, could keep a man in the SHU indefinitely based on the flimsiest evidence. Scholar Karamet Ryder documented one case in her book, 23/7, Pelican Bay Prison and the Rise of Long-Term Solitary Confinement. A prisoner she calls Ernie was validated as a member of the Aryan Brotherhood in 2003 based on drawings found in his cell, birthday cards from suspected gang members, and the fact that he had a white supremacist tattoo from before his incarceration. According to court filings, the validation often relied on confidential informants, meaning prisoners never knew who accused them or could challenge the evidence. Every 6 years, the validation would be reviewed. But reviews almost never resulted in release. The only real way out? Debriefing, providing detailed information about gang activities and members. Former prisoners describe the dilemma in testimony: give accurate information and become a target for death. Give false information just to escape, and send other men, possibly innocent, into the same hell you're trying to leave. Most chose to stay silent. And the years piled up. What the public didn't know, what California officials denied for years, was what was really happening inside Pelican Bay in its early years. In 1995, Federal District Court Judge Thelton Henderson issued a landmark ruling in the case Madrid versus Gomez. According to his decision, after reviewing extensive evidence, testimony, and prison records, guards eager to assert their dominance over inmates established a culture of violence. Court records detail specific incidents. Von Dorch, serving a 10-year sentence for grand theft, suffered from mental illness that worsened in the SHU. According to testimony, in April 1992, after he smeared himself with feces, 5 or 6 guards took him to be bathed, while he was handcuffed. They placed him in scalding water. Dorch suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns across his body. Judge Henderson's ruling described what investigators found: staged gladiator fights. Guards would intentionally release two prisoners from enemy gangs into the same area, then shoot at them with less lethal munitions after they began fighting. Prisoners beaten, tied up and left naked, caged outside in inclement weather, despite the area's freezing temperatures. But the real shock came from the overcrowding. Solitary confinement, by definition, means isolation. One prisoner, one cell. But according to court documents, by 1995, approximately 1,000 prisoners were double-bunked in the SHU. Two men, both potentially violent, both suspected gang members, locked together in 80 square feet. Prison records show this led to serious injuries from cell fights. The very violence the SHU was designed to prevent was now happening in the cells themselves. Judge Henderson's ruling found that Pelican Bay failed to provide adequate mental and physical health care. That prisoners with serious mental illness were being kept in conditions that amounted to cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment. But here's what most people don't know. Henderson's ruling didn't shut down the SHU. It didn't free the men in isolation. It ordered reforms, better medical care, better procedures, better oversight. And in doing so, according to legal scholars, the ruling legitimized long-term solitary confinement itself. It essentially said, if you clean up the most extreme abuses, you can keep doing this. The violence decreased. But the isolation continued. In some ways, legal experts argue, Pelican Bay became even more efficient at what it was designed to do: break human beings down to nothing. To understand Hugo Pinell's story, why he spent 43 years in solitary, and why he died 2 weeks after his release, you have to go back to 1965. Hugo, Yogi, Pinell was a Nicaraguan immigrant who came to California at age 12. In 1964, at 19 years old, he was charged with rape after what he claimed was a consensual encounter. According to his own testimony, he was told he'd be eligible for parole in 6 months if he pled guilty. Instead, he received a sentence of 3 years to life. By 1971, Pinell had been in prison for 7 years. On August 21st of that year, at San Quentin State Prison, a failed escape attempt left 6 people dead, including George Jackson, the revolutionary co-founder of the Black Guerrilla family. According to the official account, Jackson had been smuggled a gun. He took over his tier in the adjustment center. Guards killed Jackson. 2 other prisoners and 3 guards also died. 6 prisoners, including Pinell, were put on trial. They became known as the San Quentin Six. The trial became the longest in California history up to that time, more than 23,000 pages of testimony. The jury deliberated for 24 days, also a record. Of 46 charges brought against the 6 men, only 6 charges stuck. Pinell was convicted of assault on 2 correctional officers, accused of slitting their throats during the chaos. He received a 3rd life sentence. And from that moment on, he would spend the rest of his life in isolation. In another documented case, Clyde Jackson was sent to prison at age 17 for kidnapping, rape, robbery, and attempted murder. According to his own testimony given to Oprah Winfrey in 2017, he spent 24 years, 5 months, and 6 days in Pelican Bay's SHU. 24 years, 5 months and 6 days, Jackson said. Not an approximation. Exact. When you spend that long in isolation, every day counts. Former prisoners describe the experience in remarkably similar terms across multiple accounts and interviews. Todd Ashker, who we'll hear more about shortly, spent over 20 years in the SHU before becoming one of the leaders of the hunger strikes. According to NPR interviews and court filings, Ashker was validated as an Aryan Brotherhood member and sent to Pelican Bay indefinitely. In a separate incident documented by investigative journalism, another inmate was found in possession of a crude weapon in 1981, a double-barreled pistol, loaded and cocked. The target? Hugo Pinell. Even inside Pelican Bay, the threats followed him. In 2006, something unexpected happened. Pelican Bay officials reorganized the SHU, moving prisoners to different cells within the security housing unit. According to reporting by NPR and New Yorker journalist Ben Wallace-Wells, they thought gangs had found ways to communicate even in extreme isolation. So they shuffled the deck. They had no idea what they were about to create. 4 men ended up in the same pod, the short corridor of the SHU. All validated gang leaders. All sworn enemies. These men represented the 4 main prison gangs in California. Their gangs had killed each other's members for decades. Race-based violence had defined California prisons since the 1970s. But according to interviews conducted with the men after the hunger strikes, something changed. They were in their late 40s and early 50s. They had nothing but time. And nothing to do but talk. What happened next would shake California's entire prison system. We'll tell you exactly how in a moment. But first, hit that like button if you're starting to see why this story matters. Wallace Wells reported that the men started talking through their cell doors by shouting through the perforated steel. Not about gang politics at first. About their families. Their children. Their mothers. They passed books back and forth through their food slots. Revolutionary literature. Political philosophy. They formed what one of them later called a revolutionary book club. And slowly, according to their own accounts in court filings and media interviews, they came to a realization: the racial divisions between them weren't natural. Prison officials had encouraged them, exploited them, used them to keep prisoners at war with each other instead of focused on the conditions of their confinement. By 2011, these 4 men, representatives of the gangs that had shed rivers of blood against each other, made a decision documented in court records and prisoner advocacy group statements. They would organize a hunger strike. And they would invite every prisoner in California to join them: black, white, Latino, everyone. The goal? End indefinite solitary confinement. July 1, 2011. Approximately 400 prisoners at Pelican Bay refused their meals. Their demands, documented by the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition, were simple, almost heartbreaking in their modesty. Warm clothing for outdoor exercise. 1 phone call per week. The possibility of review after years in isolation. Within 3 weeks, according to media reports and activist organizations, the strike grew to 6,600 participants across California prisons. On July 20, 2011, something unprecedented happened. California Department of Corrections Secretary Matthew Cate traveled nearly 400 miles from Sacramento to Pelican Bay. According to accounts from those present, he sat down at a table with the 4 strike leaders. No bulletproof glass. Face to face. Cate agreed to review SHU policies. The prisoners agreed to eat. But according to prisoner accounts and advocacy group timelines, the California Department of Corrections didn't follow through. By September 2011, frustrated prisoners resumed the hunger strike. It ended again in October when officials made new promises. Again, according to prisoner testimony and legal filings, nothing changed. July 8, 2013. The 3rd hunger strike began. 30,000 prisoners refused meals on the first day. The largest hunger strike in California history, according to historians and Department of Corrections records, possibly the largest prison hunger strike in American history. It spread across 2/3 of California's 33 prisons. Prisoners in private out-of-state facilities joined. Reports documented by Amnesty International and Truthout describe men losing dangerous amounts of weight, organs beginning to fail. The strike lasted 60 days. On September 5, 2013, according to prisoner statements and news reports, state lawmakers Senator Lonnie Hancock and Assemblymember Tom Amiano promised to hold public hearings and draft legislation. The prisoners agreed to end the strike. In May 2012, the Center for Constitutional Rights, along with several other legal organizations, had filed an amended complaint in the case Ashker v. Brown, later renamed Ashker v. Governor of California. The plaintiffs, 10 men who had spent between 11 and 22 years in the SHU. The claim that indefinite solitary confinement violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Fearing they might lose the lawsuit, according to legal analysts and news reports, the state negotiated. In August 2015, they reached a settlement. California agreed to end indefinite isolation. Prisoners could no longer be sent to the SHU simply for having gang ties. They could only be isolated for specific rule infractions, and only for a maximum of 5 years. The settlement mandated that all gang-validated SHU prisoners be reviewed within 1 year. The results, published by the Center for Constitutional Rights, were staggering. By October 2016, 1 year after the settlement, the number of prisoners held in the Pelican Bay SHU for more than 10 years had dropped by 99%. Only 5 remained. After decades of the state claiming that long-term isolation was absolutely necessary for security, they emptied the SHUs in months. July 29, 2015. After spending 23 of his 43 years in solitary confinement at Pelican Bay, Hugo Pinell was transferred to California State Prison Sacramento, adjacent to the notorious Folsom Prison. He was 71 years old, the last surviving member of the San Quentin Six still in prison. According to the wrongful death lawsuit later filed by his daughter, Allegra Casimir Taylor, prison officials knew Pinell was a marked man. Multiple credible death threats existed from various groups, especially the Aryan Brotherhood, which had wanted him dead for decades. Some reports, unverified but widely circulated among prisoner advocacy groups, claimed that guards bet among themselves on how long Pinell would survive in general population. August 12, 2015. 2 weeks after his release from solitary. 39 years to the day after Pinell's conviction as one of the San Quentin Six. According to official prison incident reports, at approximately 12:55 p.m., 2 inmates, later identified as Aryan Brotherhood associates Jason, Beaver, Weaver and Waylon Pitchford, attacked Pinell on an exercise yard. He was stabbed 19 times. The attack sparked a riot involving approximately 70 inmates. Guards fired roughly 160 rounds from less lethal munitions and 3 warning shots from an M14 rifle. According to official reports, 29 inmates were injured. 11 were taken to outside hospitals. Hugo Pinell was pronounced dead at 1:22 p.m., 27 minutes after the attack began. He had survived 50 years in prison, 45 years in various forms of isolation, 23 years at Pelican Bay, longer than any other SHU prisoner. He survived it all. What he couldn't survive was 2 weeks of freedom. Here's what most people still don't understand about Pelican Bay. It wasn't just a prison. According to legal scholars and researchers like Karamet Ryder, it was the model. When Pelican Bay opened in 1989, it sparked a nationwide Supermax building boom. Prisons across America copied its design, its policies, its philosophy. By the mid-1990s, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, 44 states had built or converted facilities into Supermax prisons using the Pelican Bay template. And the psychological research is now clear. Studies by Dr. Craig Haney, Dr. Stuart Gracian, and dozens of others confirm long-term solitary confinement causes lasting psychological damage. It can create permanent psychiatric disabilities. It increases suicide risk by 8 times the general prison population. The United Nations called for its abolition in 1990, calling it a form of torture. But it took 4 gang leaders, sworn enemies, starving themselves and convincing 30,000 others to join them. It took a federal lawsuit. It took decades of advocacy. And even now, according to the Lyman Center at Yale Law School, approximately 55,000 to 62,500 people were in solitary confinement in U.S. prisons on any given day in 2020. If this documentary opened your eyes to what's happening in America's prisons, subscribe to this channel. We're investigating the stories the system doesn't want you to know. Pelican Bay still operates today. The SHU is mostly empty now, 80% fewer inmates than just a few years ago, according to California Department of Corrections. But the question remains, if California could empty the SHUs in a matter of months after decades of claiming it was impossible, what were they really doing all those years? And how many Hugo Pinells, men who could have been rehabilitated, reintegrated, given a second chance, did we break beyond repair? Some cages are invisible, but they're just as real.